Alright my friends, welcome back to All Cars. It is time for another Motorweek Retro Review Reaction video, and this week, I admit, this is not what I wanted to do. This is the 1995 Dodge Plymouth Neon, and I'm completely shocked I've not done this one before. If you've been a fan of the channel, you know in my various stories that we had a 95, I believe it was, Neon. I had graduated from college and gotten married to my first wife, and her car immediately died, and we had to buy something on a Sunday, and the Dodge dealer was open. It turned out this was a fun car. We enjoyed this car. It was the first Chrysler product I had owned, and it was glorious for about 70,000 miles. So I can't believe I haven't done this before with all I've talked about neons and the replacements and the caliber and things like that. So let's take a trip down memory lane, grab your beverage of choice, sit back in your comfy chair, and let's see what Motorweek said about it when it was brand new.
Motorweek is made possible by TireRack.com and RockAuto.com.
Just 2 months ago, we gave you our first impressions of the new Dodge and Plymouth Neon, the small car with which Chrysler hopes to grab a serious chunk of the subcompact segment. We were very impressed, thinking that Chrysler just might have its fourth home run in as many years. Now we've had a chance to spend a little more time with the Neon. Have our opinions changed? You bet they have, but only for the better, because the more miles we rack up in base, highline, and sport-grade Neons, the more we enjoy driving Chrysler Corporation's heavyweight contender in the small car marketplace. Neon didn't impress us by accident. Chrysler small car planners asked the press and the public alike what they didn't like about small cars, and then focused on making Neon shine in those areas. First was safety, so all Neons have an airbag for the front seat passenger, as well as the required one for the driver, inside one of the smallest airbag housings yet. Neons also have a high level of impact protection, an integrated child safety seat option, and anti-lock brakes are available on all models. Neon's cab-forward design and longest-in-class 104-inch wheelbase went a long way to negate customers' second small car complaint, lack of interior space.
So this is all over the place, structured a little bit differently than I expected. But so let's start with styling here. If they do it, we'll talk more about the interior in a minute. I love it, honestly, I do. They did a really good job. And at the beginning there, they were talking about the home runs that Chrysler was hitting, and I kind of feel like the 90s were the peak of Chrysler. Sure, they had a long heritage, and ever since then they have nothing that really interests me. But they came out with the Neon, they came out with the Ram truck, they came out with the LH cars, they came out with the Cloud cars. These were peak Chrysler, they weren't as good as what the imports were doing. This is really, really good. It maximized interior space, and it wasn't boring. You can argue, and I understand criticism that says it's too cutesy, and there's a little bit of that. A little bit of almost like they designed it to appeal to the Japanese market a little bit. But I do feel they did it right. The headlights they didn't make them overly large or ovoid or runny egg. They just did it. And it was simple, and it had great space efficiency, and the rear was good trunk space with big light. It just worked. It's not a beautiful car. It's not a classic car. It's not going to go down in any automobile design books as being the pinnacle of 1995 small car technology, and I will never, ever, ever argue that a Toyota Corolla was not a better car. This is flawed, right? But I do think it's good looking, and it's distinctive, and it had personality, something that I think is very lacking in modern cars.
Neon's Airy Cabin is every bit as roomy as it looks, with leg, hip, head, and shoulder room that matches or exceeds anything in its class. People also said that...
Well, but I don't know if they're going to come back to it, so let's stop there and talk about the interior. Cheap plastic. Lots and lots of cheap plastic. And it was noisy. The door panels were just a sheet of plastic. The dashboard was just a mass of plastic. But functionally it did well, and you were buying it based on price. This was not meant to be an entry-level luxury car. This was meant to be an entry-level car. And yeah, you know, the door panels were just all plastic with plastic door handles and cheap plastic buttons, but it worked. The ergonomics were good. They were solid. The instrument cluster, the binnacle for the HVAC and the radio worked. It was a little low, but it worked. The vents were nice and big. It all was cheap, but it was cheerful. And there's, you know, it's something I've harped on here. It's something I believe that there's something special about cheap and cheerful cars that are just kind of fun. And that's what the Neon did very, very well. It was cheap. And I won't even argue that other cars were better, but this one was really good. And even the seats, I don't know if they're going to come back to it or not, the seats, the fabric's not impressive. The seats aren't overly, but it all worked in a very holistic way to be sporty yet comfortable.
That small cars weren't fun to drive. Chrysler found that they meant a lack of control, due mostly to unresponsive handling and sluggish acceleration. Customers had very clear expectations for steering, acceleration, and braking. To meet them, all Neons get four-wheel independent suspension, with struts in front, and new multiple links out back. Cars equipped with sport or touring suspensions also get a front sway bar. We found our sport-grade Neon very tossable through the slalom. Although its power rack and pinion steering required lots of input, it had excellent feel and precision. Overall, our team rated it the best handling of all small family cars we've tested, and lots of fun. A responsive powertrain is also part of the fun-to-drive equation, so all current Neons receive Chrysler's all-new 2-liter single overhead cam 16-valve 4-cylinder engine. Without much fuss, it produces a best-in-class 132 horsepower and 129 pound-feet of torque.
So let's talk about this real quick. This engine was solid. It wasn't as publicized as, say, the Quad 4. It wasn't by a long shot. It was not as smooth as what Honda or Toyota were doing. It made good power, but it was a little noisy about it. It just ended up being a pretty okay engine. Ours, about 70,000 miles, it blew a head gasket. That's a problem, right? But it ended up, the rest of its life, it ended up being pretty cool. It had a lot of torque, it had power, it was just noisy. I kind of like the engine. I don't trust it, but I kind of like it. And the hopped up version of it was a little bit more fun.
A dual cam version is due in November. Good low-end torque helps scoot our manual transmission Neon from 0 to 60 in an unsmall car like 8.1 seconds with little front drive torque steer. Our 2,448-pound Neon also sped through the quarter mile in just 16.2 seconds, ending at 87 miles per hour. This accurate...
Not bad numbers. Again, that's okay. Nothing, you know, you're not buying a Porsche 911 here, but that's pretty peppy. And that was the thing about the Neon, is it was fun to drive. You're not going to win a stoplight race necessarily. And I will, right here, I will say up front, we had an automatic, and I'm going to talk about the automatic in a minute. But it was just fun. Chrysler nailed this one.
Short throw 5-speed shifter is standard on all Neons. However, the optional automatic has only 3 speeds. Sport grade Neons are shod with 65 series 14-inch Eagle GAs. Base and Highline cars get less aggressive tires on puny 13-inch rims. All Neons stop with power-assisted vented disc brakes in front and drums at the rear. Our sport grade Neon with standard ABS stopped from 60 and a good average distance of 120 feet. Fade was minimal, but we'd prefer a harder pedal. Other Neons we've driven felt better.
Nice results. 120 feet, that's really nice. But what I want to focus on here is no drama, no lockup, no squirreliness at all. Just a slow, a stop, right? Not slow. 120 feet is not bad. great engineering. That's what I'm trying to say right there.
We feel very good about Neon's styling. Chrysler was determined to give Neon an oval personality through its friendly, smiling face. We think Neon's designers succeeded in creating a smart-looking small four-door that stands out from the crowd. A two-door coupe arrives in May. Neon's aerodynamic shape helps it achieve EPA mileage ratings of 29 city and 38 highway. We got an even 30 miles per gallon in real-world driving. Neon's interior sound level of only 65 decibels is excellent for a small car.
I'll disagree with that. Yeah, it got pretty good gas mileage, not outstanding. We, at the time, almost every weekend, were driving about 2.5, 3 hours back and forth to see family from where we lived. And we took this car almost every single time. And it was exhausting. It really was. It felt like it sat kind of low, and it revved really high, and it was noisy. There was road noise and engine noise, and it was exhausting. So I don't know where they came up with 65, because that is luxury car level of quietness. This was not a quiet car. It wasn't outrageous. It wasn't a Yugo, but it was not a quiet car, as I recall.
The large doors open wide for easy access to that interior. The supportive bucket seats are firm. A tilt wheel is standard on sport models. Gauges are large, very legible analog units, but lack volts and oil pressure readouts. 4 easy-to-use and operate rotary knobs control the efficient air conditioning system. Our car's up-level stereo sounded fine and was equally easy to use. Neons have a variety of interior storage areas, including a real glove box, 2 large cup holders, a front storage bin with coin tray, and this available covered console complete with tissue holder. Neon's rear seat is also spacious. Fixed on the base car, it folds 60/40 on Sport and Highline cars, which combined with a wide flat trunk give lots of cargo space. Our only 2 interior disappointments are the sometimes thin plastic trim panels, and the rear windows only go down about a third.
So a bunch of thoughts here. And so first off, they said kind of what I was thinking. The interior is cheap. It's a lot of plastic. And again, the plastic door handles really jump out at me. But it's functional. The radio specifically was a little low and a little far away. Ergonomically, it could have been a little bit better, but everything just worked well, because look at the HVAC. Big dials. They weren't upscale, but they were clearly marked and they worked well. Same thing with the radio. Big buttons to press. So maybe it was a little far away, but big knobs and big buttons. It all just worked so well, and it was pretty stylish. I would say it looked better than the Pontiac Sunfire at the same time. From the same era, right? Because that was the other car we were kind of comparing it to. Backseat was pretty comfortable, small, but pretty comfortable. They did show it, but they didn't really comment on it with the trunk, that the rear seats laid down, but you didn't get a flat floor. You get this jump up. It was okay. We didn't carry a lot of stuff. But when the seats were up, it was a pretty big trunk. And for what at the time was a couple and then a young family, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. Great car. While it lasted, great car. And I'd like to say, I've never seen her before. How many people have they had who are testers and on camera who have passed through the Motorweek production? And where did they end up going? I'm just kind of curious now.
And disappointments are few among other auto media as well. Autoweek said Neon has a solid design, a good chassis, an outstanding engine, and room to beat the best. While Automobile Magazine proclaimed Neon its Automobile of the Year, saying if Saturn dealers had gotten this car to go with their business methods and humane treatment of customers, they'd rule the world. So what does it cost for Neon's safety, performance, cuteness, and convenience? Base cars begin at a rock-bottom $8,975, Highline at $10,690, and Sport at $12,215. Most buyers should be able to equip their Neon the way they want for between $11,000 and $12,000. Chrysler is targeting the Neon at a state of mind rather than one specific age group, because they believe it's a car that's both practical and appealing. We think the folks at Chrysler can go into their home run trot again.
So, one of the things they didn't talk about, but you could kind of see it in the last driving picture there, is how much headroom this car ended up having. It was relatively spacious for its size. It was comfortable. It was big. It was somewhat peppy, but raucous. It handled pretty well, but didn't ride super soft. It was a flawed car, but it was one of the most memorable and fun cars I've owned because it was tossable. It was peppy. It did what you needed it to do when you weren't trying to be a racer. It just worked really, really well. And it had a good amount of space, and the stereo was fine. And we had a two-door version. The transmission, when Chrysler was developing this, they were looking at it to beat everybody in terms of power and personality and handling and space and price. And the transmission was where they really, really flubbed it pretty bad, because they went out and they designed a brand spanking new 3-speed transaxle because they didn't think people really wanted the 4-speed. And this, to me, functionally it worked fine, but when you think about it being on the interstate, and it was kind of a rough riding car. It felt like it never had a lot of suspension articulation. That fourth gear would have made everything just a little calmer, would have improved gas mileage slightly, and yes, it would have been slightly more expensive. But that's part of the problem that I think all the U.S. automakers had for a long time, is like, well, if this will do just fine, why should we invest in this? That argument was used for pushrod engines, for multi-speed transmissions, for everything. And unfortunately, Chrysler got hung up in it in designing this. They should have sprung for the 4-speed, because while it won awards and while it was a pretty good seller, it always came across as the cheap alternative and slightly behind the times relative to, say, the Honda Civic. And I strongly disagree with them in that quote from, I think it was Automobile Magazine, saying that if Saturn had this car, they'd be world beaters. And I disagree. The Saturns were much, much nicer cars than the Neon. There's no doubt about it. They may not have been quite as spacious, but the quality of the materials and the ride and everything else was much nicer in a Saturn. But you bought this because it was thousands of dollars less, up to thousands of dollars less. It was a heck of a bargain, and it was so much fun. And when we went to buy, again, the Pontiac Sunfire was on our list. We never considered a Corolla. We never considered a Civic. And honestly, we never considered a Saturn because their prices were so much more expensive. It really came down to this and a Sunfire, and the Dodge dealer was open on a Sunday. That's what it ended up being. And my wife at the time needed a car for Monday morning to get to work. It was a cool car. I miss it. Lots of the simple functionality of a car like that. It's got a pretty peppy engine. It's got a lot of space. It's fun to drive, and everything's cheap. I love it. I miss it. Good review. They could have gone into a lot more detail, but good review. I appreciate you being here, guys. Let me know your thoughts below. Thanks.